Hello and welcome to the Haaretz Podcast. I'm Allison Kaplan-Summer in Tel Aviv. It's the most iconic and romantic image of the Holy Land, olive trees from which farmers harvest every year. The months of October and November are peak harvest season in the Holy Land, and tragically, they have become peak season for conflict in the West Bank. Settlers systematically and increasingly are targeting Palestinian farmers harvesting their farmland, along with international volunteers and local volunteers who accompany them as a protective presence in confrontations that have become increasingly violent in nature. Today on the podcast, I speak with a young American Jewish woman who has paid a high price for taking part in that volunteer effort. Lila Stillman Utterback was part of an olive harvesting group organized by Rabbis for Human Rights in late October when she was detained by the Israeli military. She found herself swiftly deported from Israel, a practice that has become increasingly common for international volunteers who are told that they are violating the terms of their tourist visas. Then I'm also joined by Anton Goodman, Director of Partnerships at Rabbis for Human Rights, which runs the volunteer program that Lila participated in. He offers a view from the inside on the challenging work of assisting these olive farmers and how the current Israeli government's emboldenment of settlers is making it increasingly dangerous. He also discusses the deportation of Lila and another American Jewish female volunteer. Those conversations coming up.
I'm Esther Solomon, Editor-in-Chief of Haaretz English. Around the world, the fight is on to preserve critical and independent media. Haaretz, Israel's oldest newspaper, upholds its long tradition of accurate, committed, and incisive journalism, refusing to bend its reporting to pressure from any government or leader. A digital subscription to Haaretz gives you up-to-the-minute news and analysis in English from journalists who live Israel's reality and are committed to covering the Middle East and its global repercussions. At the same time, your subscription supports the cause of a free press that holds the powerful to account in Israel and around the world. I invite you to become a subscriber to Haaretz now. Just go to Haaretz.com and use the code Haaretz10, that's Haaretz with the number 10, for 10% off an annual subscription.
Lila Stillman Utterback, welcome to the Haaretz Podcast, and thank you so much for agreeing to come on.
Thank you for having me.
Lila, can we start by talking about what happened to you on the day you were detained and the process that led to your deportation? Can you walk us through it and what it was like for you?
I had been going with Rabbis for Human Rights to the olive harvest for several weeks before the day that I was detained, and those harvest days had always been calm and smooth, and I got on the bus in the morning in Jerusalem expecting a similar experience on Wednesday. I felt very comfortable, and even when we reached the entrance to the village of Borin and encountered what is called a flying checkpoint, where the IDF parks their vehicle across the road and instates a temporary checkpoint, I was not worried. And after speaking with the coordinator of our group, the IDF and the coordinator spoke, and then the bus turned around, and I believed we were leaving the place where we had not been allowed to enter and did not expect any further tension. We proceeded to drive for over 25 minutes, reached a field where volunteers with Rabbis for Human Rights from Tel Aviv were already harvesting, and harvested peacefully for about 2 hours in the same way we had been doing for weeks before. And walking back to the bus, we encountered the army. And I did not know this at the time, but learned later that while we had been harvesting, our bus driver had encountered the army and his keys had been taken, and he was asked by the army to reveal our location. So while I thought we were walking back to the bus, we were actually walking towards the army, and they held us on the side of the road until the police were able to come, and the police told our entire bus to proceed to the police station and that we were being detained. When we arrived at the police station, everyone was questioned, and after waiting a few hours, all the people holding Israeli citizenship and people on long-term visas were released with a 15-day ban, while I remained at the station with the other American on a tourist visa.
And how did you feel at the time?
Initially, being detained, I was not extremely worried. I had known other international activists who were detained while doing solidarity work in the West Bank and did not expect anything more than the 15-day ban from the West Bank that the Israelis received. I certainly did not expect anything like deportation or being banned from the country for 10 years.
So what happened between then and when they actually put you on a plane?
I waited in the police station in the settlement of Ariel for several hours after the Israeli citizens in the group had left, and hours later was told that my status had changed from being detained to being arrested, and that they were going to move to deport me, and that I would have another questioning at Ben Gurion at 3 in the morning. So at 3 in the morning, I was taken with the other American woman to an immigration office in Ben Gurion and questioned. And then after that, on Thursday morning, was taken to a detention center in Ramla, spent the day in the detention center, and then was told Thursday night that there was a flight to the US that I could board. And on Friday morning, I boarded the flight back to New York.
You sound very calm, but you're 18 years old. I'm sure haven't been in anything resembling this kind of situation. I'm wondering how you were treated and how you reacted.
I was treated very well by the police and by the other people. I think I surprised myself by feeling relatively calm and okay throughout the many hours that I was being moved from place to place. I think I had an understanding that the situation was out of my control. At the point that I was told that my detention had been turned into arrest and that there was movement to deport me, I kind of understood that the decision had been made. And even though I was going to have the hearing later, even though the hearing hadn't happened yet, I understand the context within which the police system operates. It's a police system headed by Ben Gvir, and I understood that my solidarity action was not wanted. So going through detention center and the immigration office, I understood that, all I had to do was follow the directions, and I was being treated well. So I kind of, took the position of, okay, like this is what's happening right now. And there was a lot of just sitting and waiting involved.
Until then, your olive harvesting experiences, were they peaceful? Were they, interrupted by any kind of disruptions by settlers, or, you just did your thing, you volunteered? And if you can share just kind of why was doing this meaningful to you?
Yeah, all of the olive harvests that I had attended, probably about 6 or 7 in the few weeks before I was deported, were peaceful. I know that also in those weeks there were encounters with settlers, but I never volunteered on a day where there was any conflict. And I found olive harvesting to be an incredibly meditative and grounded way to express solidarity. I think that having something to do with your hands and feeling so physically helpful and being able to work with the Palestinian partners on their land and to be contributing in such a tangible way felt very important to me. And I also felt that there was something kind of biblical and really beautiful about the connection to land that the olive harvest was giving me. Olives are one of the 7 species of Israel, and while harvesting with my friend, we had a conversation about how the olive harvest was one of the most uniting forces. There were all these rabbis and Israelis and Palestinians working together to do something that people in the land of Israel have done for thousands and thousands of years, and to be able to feel connected to land and also to express solidarity and to be in partnership with Palestinians at the same time felt very important to me.
So a lot of those comments emphasize the fact that you're not exactly the typical image of a pro-Palestinian foreign volunteer who gets kicked out of Israel. Your mom is a rabbi. You kind of sound like a poster girl for an engaged young American Jew who decided to spend some time in Israel before she goes to college. Tell us about yourself a little bit.
I grew up perceiving the world through my Judaism and very surrounded by Judaism, and have always learned about Judaism and also about Israel through the lens of Jewish values like tikkun, repairing the world, and betzohim, that every human is created in the image of God. And those values always prefaced any interaction, either talking about Israel or visiting Israel. I lived in Jerusalem with my family for my entire 10th grade year, and it was really an opportunity for me to learn what it is to live kind of in the heart of a struggle. And I think that's what feels so important to me about being able to actually be in Israel and in Jerusalem specifically, is to be right inside of the struggle. And I feel that there's a lot more that we can do when we're in it and when we're able to understand it. And because of that, I've been back to Israel every summer since 2022 and 2023, when I lived there with my camp and with the Bronfman Fellowship. And I decided to return for my gap year because maintaining that connection feels incredibly important to me, even when I am extremely frustrated with the actions of the Israeli government, both in terms of the impunity for settler violence and their actions in Gaza. I think it's incredibly important to maintain connection.
Yeah, the Bronfman Fellowship, for those not familiar, is a very prestigious, high-level group of American Jewish students, and they join with Israelis, and they do all kinds of leadership development activities, both home in the States and in Israel. You were also a Hebrew teacher, right? You went to Jewish summer camp, etc.
Yes, I taught Hebrew school.
Coming from this background, the fact that you're banned from coming to Israel now officially for 10 years, I'm wondering, how is this experience affecting you personally, your feelings, your connection to Israel? Are you determined to fight this? Are you so alienated that you don't want to come back? Tell me how you feel right now that you're back in the States.
I think the 10-year ban is the personally what I feel most hurt by as part of this whole process. And I think it violates my understanding that I've had for my whole life and been taught for my whole life, that Israel is a place for me as a Jew, and is a place for every kind of Jew, and is a place where I could find belonging. Because I think the message I was being told by being deported as a Jew, which is quite unprecedented, is that I was not the right kind of Jew, and that this deportation happened despite my Judaism, because I was not the type of Jew who's willing to condone the status quo that the current government upholds in the West Bank and in Israel, which is a status quo of allowing settler violence to go without any consequences, and a status quo that conflates violence with Judaism, which is not my understanding of Judaism in any way. And I think I have every right to feel so frustrated or alienated, as you put it, to not want to return. And I know many, many friends in the US, young American Jews, who feel frustrated with Israel's actions and have decided that their relationship with Israel is over, is indefinitely severed, because they're just too angry to maintain it. But I don't feel that way. I think that my connection to Israel and my relationship with the place cannot be severed, because I believe that to be committed to both Israeli and Palestinian flourishing is to be willing to, as I said before, be in the place of struggle. And I really believe that solidarity actions like the Olive Harvest and like Protective Presence are some of the largest ways that Jews can assert the belief that there's no security or safety for Israelis without security or safety for Palestinians. So not being able to return feels deeply frustrating to me.
So I understand, though, it's being fought in court by some of the organizations that you are affiliated with. And so do you have hopes that it's going to be overturned and you'll be able to come to Israel before 10 years?
I do have hope. I just joined Knesset meeting this morning with MK Gilad Kariv regarding my deportation, and spoke to the meeting. And I know that there are people in Israel working on an appeal. And I really do hope that at least the 10-year sentence can be lessened, because to not be able to maintain my relationship to a place that I love and care for deeply feels very hard to me.
Well, I hope so too, Lila. I hope we see you back here soon. Lila Stillman Utterback, thank you so much for coming on the podcast. Good luck with everything and good luck with starting college.
Thank you.
Coming up next, my conversation with Anton Goodman, Director of Partnerships for Rabbis for Human Rights. Anton Goodman is the Director of Partnerships at Rabbis for Human Rights. He moved to Israel from Oxford in the UK 25 years ago. Anton, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you for having me.
So, to begin with, let's get some perspective on olive harvest season in the West Bank over the years. When and how did it become such a flashpoint between Palestinians and Israeli settlers?
Well, firstly, we need a little bit of longer context because the olive harvest has been an important part of the agricultural year on this land for thousands of years. And it's been a time of great cultural significance, spiritual significance in all of our religions. There's talk of the olive tree, of the 7 species, of the pure light that it gives, using it in our rituals. And the olive harvest in the West Bank is especially important to Palestinian farming communities who rely on it as a major source of income. And to be honest, that's never been more important because for the last 2 years during this time of war, Palestinians in the West Bank have not had entry permission to come and work in Israel. And so the olive harvest is one of the ways in which they can get through the year, both making olive oil for themselves and their families, and also selling in their communities.
How have things evolved, presumably for the worse, over the years in terms of their access to the olive trees, efforts by the settlers to prevent their ability to harvest peacefully?
Over the last few years, we've seen a spiraling descent into lawlessness in the West Bank and a really significant rise in extremist violence. This happens throughout the year. This is a day-to-day experience across the West Bank in all of Area C and also in Palestinians living in Area B towns as well. And now the olive harvest has become a flashpoint because this is the time when Palestinian farmers are leaving their homes in Area B and going to their olive groves in Area C. And now these olive groves might be adjacent to one of the many new settler outposts that have been established. And the settler outposts, the idea there is to take control over those areas of land. It's based on extremist Jewish thinking. And so when settlers see Palestinians coming to pick their olives, they become an immediate target for very severe violence. And now there has been violence in the past, of course. It hasn't been this kind of scale, and it also hasn't been with this much impunity. Because what we're seeing on the ground is either a collusion or an ignorance of the security forces who quite simply aren't cracking down on the settler violence that is affecting all of the West Bank.
Your organization, Rabbis for Human Rights, is part of a very prominent effort by the Jewish sector, not you're leading it, but there are several organizations involved, right, to contribute to both protecting Palestinians who are harvesting and to volunteer as harvesters. This effort includes Israelis, it includes international volunteers, Jewish and non-Jewish. How does that work?
Right, and this is an effort we've been doing as an organization for the past 20 years. And this harvest, we're very proud to be in partnership with so many organizations in Israeli society and also from Jewish communities around the world. An effort to come together to provide protective presence for the Palestinian farmers who are harvesting, which is basically by using our presence on the ground, maybe our Israeli privilege or our knowledge of the law or our ability to film any violence that takes place, to lower the levels of violence and to enable Palestinian communities to reach their lands and harvest in peace.
With that background, let's talk about what's happening this year. Do you see an effect of the current government? You mentioned the Gaza war as being important in the olive harvest, but how is it affecting, I guess, the behavior of the settlers, the behavior of the Israeli military, the reports we've seen of emboldened settlers doing things, I guess, more obviously or prominently or more shamelessly, both during the time of war and now even after the ceasefire? What are you seeing this year specifically?
Listen, this year, the situation on the ground is out of control. We have never seen anything like this. We've seen settler attacks. We've seen unnecessary army aggression and restrictions, but we've never seen such a peak moment of violence affecting so many communities and so many different harvest dates. It's almost impossible to count the number. And we're not a data gathering organization, but if you ask OCHA from the United Nations, they'll tell you there's been hundreds of attacks in just 4 weeks. And so what we've really got is this perfect storm that's come together with extremists at the heart of the Israeli government who have sent clear policy recommendations to the police not to arrest and not even to come to settle violent events. The rule of law is totally diminished. Sometimes the army might be there to protect the Palestinians, which is its duty under Israeli and international law. But sometimes we're seeing groups of settlers who are also in the army, maybe they're reservists in their settlement, joining in the violence and also attacking us, the activists who are there.
Have you witnessed, personally been involved in any of the incidents this year, seen what's happened?
Yes, sure. I've seen many events that have happened. And on one hand, we're seeing unnecessarily military restrictions. I've received personally 6 closed military zone orders for areas of land that we were peacefully harvesting. Now, I don't see the army doing this when there's violence coming into the ground so quickly as they do it when we just come to harvest together to prevent the Palestinians from reaching their land, to prevent the harvest from happening. And on the other hand, I'm seeing a spate of settler violence on the ground. I was in Silwad, which is a Palestinian village north of Ramallah. We were attacked by 15 or 16 pretty young settlers who came in throwing rocks at us. I immediately called the police and continued to call the police to no avail. The army did show up, but they pretty much stood on the side as the settlers tried to break our tools, injured one of our staff, prevented an ambulance from arriving. Throughout all of this, we continued harvesting. And we managed to stay there until the army themselves took out a closed military zone order that they said didn't apply to the settlers, but applied to us. And so you can see the kind of difficulties we're facing on the ground.
Not to over dramatize, but just can you describe a little bit of what it's like to be there? Are you trying to, these settlers are presumably fellow Israelis. Are you trying to talk to them in Hebrew? Are you trying to communicate with them? Are you just trying to defend yourself? Do you, just trying to protect yourself from the rocks and continue harvesting? Can you just paint a picture for me of what it's like to be there?
Well, first and foremost, we're trying to protect ourselves, the volunteers who are with us, and the farmers who are with us on the day. And this can be very tricky, especially when there's rocks flying in or there's violence on the ground. It's also not a population, for the most part, that at this moment you can have discourse with. This isn't the time for an argument or discuss, differences of opinion. This is an extremely radicalized group within Jewish society that's a danger to us all. And so I've seen young settlers arriving wearing tefillin and throwing rocks while they're wearing tefillin. This is an extremism that should worry us all. And what it's creating is a form of Jewish terrorism. Until we start addressing it on a national level through the security forces, through the government ministries and agencies, there's absolutely no way to get on top of it. And so you can't have discourse or a conversation. What you can do is you can interposition, which means putting your body in between the settler violence and the harvesters, and using other non-violent actions to try and lower the level of violence and to try and stop people getting hurt.
2 young Jewish American women volunteers made the headlines when they were accused of violating the terms of their tourist visas and being in, as you say, a closed military zone. And it seemed like there was a very rapid process where they were detained, deported, and banned from Israel for 10 years. What kind of message does that send?
These 2 women, Jewish Americans who'd visited Israel many times and have deep connections and, the Jewish identity and love for all peoples, found themselves as a target in some kind of game where the enforcement of this order, they were pulled off the bus, detained, put into jail for 2 or 3 days. When they came back to get their clothes, I heard they were in a jail uniform as if they were serious criminal offenders. And then there was a shotgun trial. They were deported from Israel, and they both received a 10-year ban from re-entering Israel, which we are currently appealing through the Israeli court system. What kind of message does that send is a very problematic message, not just about the way in which Israel relates and treats Jewish visitors who've got a long relationship with the state, but also the kind of society that we're creating here. Because if you look at that enforcement, that heavy-handed, draconian enforcement on one side, against this very light touch, when there's actual violent settlers on the ground, then you start to understand the rules of engagement here. Very problematic.
There were reports, including in Haaretz, of the use of drones by settlers, and a volunteer was wounded by them. Is this something new? Can you tell us about the drones?
Yeah, I was on the ground today in the West Bank, and there was a drone flying above. And also yesterday, I was on a harvest day, and there was a large drone flying above us. Drones have become a tool that are used generally by the settler security as in the security of the settlements, often just by individual settlers, and it's unclear if the military is actually operating them. But we had an incident where there was last week on Tuesday when there was a drone that was intimidating the group. It was going up and down and flying at head level. And in the end, it hit one of my colleagues, who's a very dear Israeli rabbi, and she was badly injured. She had to go to hospital to get stitches on her arm, and she's receiving occupational therapy to get over this injury. And unfortunately, the two soldiers who were involved in this case were on reserve duty. One of them, who subsequently shot in the air, was removed from the reservists, but the one who flew the drone into the rabbi received a stern warning, we were told.
So these drones, you say, are being operated by the military, not by the settlers? I'm confused. Which group is bringing the drones and controlling them?
And you know what? It's good that you're confused, because it's very confusing on the ground. The line between who's just a settler and who's in army service is totally blurred. This has happened since the beginning of the war, when the settlers, unlike the rest of the population, were recruited into reserve duty. Many of them stayed within their settlements and were active reservists, but in their settlements and around their area. That didn't happen in the rest of the country. And so that's been left over. From that is you've got a large number of settlers who are in and out of reserve duty. And it's unclear if they're active or if maybe they're taking time off, but they might be wearing half army uniforms sometimes. It can be very unclear. Or maybe they're the Kitat Konanut, which is the quick response force of the settlement. This is the reality on the ground, that you're not even sure if they're in official position when they come and speak to you.
Wow. Anton, widening the issue to the bigger problem of settler violence beyond only the olive harvest, I ask because you wrote a piece about it in Haaretz, and it was headlined, How Israel's Violent West Bank Settlers Place Minors in the Line of Fire. And you wrote the piece after a 14-year-old boy from the city of Beit Shan, which is in Israel proper within the Green Line, was involved in a riot in the West Bank, and he was evacuated for medical treatment. So can you just tell us about the issue of minors? We've heard, for so long about Hilltop Youth, about the West Bank young settlers. So what drove you to speak out about this now?
What led me to speak about this is that there is constant use and abuse of Israeli minors, many of whom who are youth at risk, by the settlement leadership, the violent settlement leadership, who are looking to use them as tools on the ground within the conflict and to activate them as violent players. And so they will invite them to come and stay in outposts, and there are even social welfare programs where an outpost can host youth at risk. This is a tragedy, and a lot of the times we're facing minors who are attacking us, and we cannot lose our compassion or understanding that they're also victims of this, really disgraceful way of operating, of attracting minors into conflict zones and to be the violent participants. This is something that should concern all of Israeli society. This is about the next generations that are coming up and where it's going to be leading us. We've seen Hilltop Youth from the beginnings of it, and they've grown into the families who are creating the outposts, and now they're recruiting a much larger cohort of youth at risk. And when you see a 14-year-old teenager or 13-year-old teenager carrying a long knife into a Palestinian community, obviously they need to be stopped, and the weapon needs to be removed from them by the security forces. But I also have in my heart a deep pain for the individual, for that young person who has found themselves in this situation. And we should care more for our children.
How do they find them? How do they find the presumably, you say youth at risk, but normative or non-normative 14-year-old from a location inside Israel, and get this kid to end up in the West Bank with a knife in his hand in a Palestinian village?
This is a very active recruitment, and it takes place in a number of ways. But we should also point a finger at the mainstream settler movement in Israel. Just before the holidays, before Rosh Hashanah, Rabbi Yaakov Meidan, who is the head of the yeshiva of Haaretz in Gush Etzion, it's supposedly a liberal and modern Orthodox yeshiva, made a video saying to all of his students, instead of your plans that you had for the Yamim Noraim, for Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, go to the outposts, he said, not to settlements, to outposts, and join their prayer services. What we saw following that was a massive influx of young settlers into the outposts over Rosh Hashanah. And I personally know people who were attacked by some of these Rosh Hashanah guests as they came down on Rosh Hashanah, sometimes on ATV vehicles, and beat people up.
Anton, finally, you are, as we said when we introduced you, the director of partnerships for Rabbis for Human Rights. Presumably that means partnerships within Israel with Palestinian organizations and international organizations. This puts you in a good position to see how the Gaza war, how post-October 7th events have affected the global community, the Jewish community on the left that volunteers for your projects, how they relate to Israel, non-Jews who come in and sometimes visit and volunteer. I'm interested in your impressions and thoughts about allies, about groups globally, again, including Palestinian groups. I'm wondering whether the war, what's happened in Gaza over the past 2 years is leading such people to intensify their engagement because they care so much, or maybe not wanting to work with you because you are Israelis, despite the fact that you're on their side politically.
As we both know, there's a huge diversity of response, and we find ourselves in a polarized world where, conventional norms are falling to pieces, and we're losing the safety nets of democracy and understanding. And at the same time, I think that crystallizes some of the values that are most important to us. So in our organization, we always speak about Kedushat HaChaim, the sanctity of life, that this is an inherent divine sanctity of life of all people. And if that is your value-based generator, if that's what gets you up in the morning, then you're going to find that there's a lot of other people who aren't from your religion and aren't from your people who agree with that value. And so when you have value-based partnerships, and we have partnerships that are interfaith connections, we have a forum, the Interfaith Forum for Human Rights, and we have religious leaders there who have very different theological perspectives on the world, on how we should bring the divine into the world. But what they agree on are the basic premise of human rights and the sanctity of life. And that's true in Palestinian society as well. And since the start of the war, we have definitely grown in our partnerships with Palestinian organizations. And we're very proud about this, because this is modeling the kind of future that we need to create. At this moment, it seems very far away. But if we don't plant those seeds, if we don't go back to these kind of core values that we can agree upon, then there's no moving forward together.
I'll leave it on that note. Hope for moving forward. Anton Goodman, Director of Partnerships at Rabbis for Human Rights. Thank you so much for coming on the podcast and sharing what you've been doing with us, and stay safe.
Thank you so much. Join us on the ground.
And that's it for this episode of the Haaretz Podcast. Thanks to my guests, Lila Stillman-Utterback and Anton Goodman, and to producer Eli Shimoni and editor Nara Malkin. If you want to continue to listen to our podcast and make sure you never miss an episode, please subscribe to us on Apple, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. And if you're so inclined, leave us a 5-star rating, and that way more people can find us. And to keep up with all the latest news on Israel, the Middle East, and the Jewish world, don't forget to subscribe to and follow Haaretz.com. I'm Allison Kaplan-Summer, and until next time, shalom from Tel Aviv.